Hello and welcome to my channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. My name is Alfonso Peluso, and I'm an associate teaching professor in the College of Architecture at IIT, the home of the legendary Mies van der Rohe, and I'm adjunct faculty at Columbia College Chicago in the Interior Architecture program. Shout out to all my students. I hope you're having a great day. It's a nice, sunny, late winter, early spring day here in Chicago. I hope the weather's great where you're at. Today, we are going to look at Stable Diffusion Deforum. This will allow us to create awesome animations like the one that you're seeing on the screen now. All right, before we jump into the tutorial, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, what are you waiting for? Click on subscribe. Click on the down arrow to receive all the notifications. Help me get to 14,000 subscribers. That would be a great milestone. There is something here for everyone. There is AI, Stable Diffusion, Mid-Journey, there's Rendering, Lumion, Enscape, Twin Motion, there's Rhino, there's Grasshopper, there's Revit. There is something here for you. All right, also connect with me on Instagram at my first name Alfonso underscore my last name Peluso. See what I've been up to lately. I've been making a lot of videos to help architecture students along. Some funny ones in there too. Help me get to 10,000 followers. That would be awesome. All right, so we are going to be working in Stable Diffusion, and we're going to be using Deforum, which I'm highlighting here with my cursor. So if you haven't downloaded and installed Deforum, that's something you're going to go ahead and do. I'll put a link down in the description where you can find Deforum. All right, so we're just going to go through some steps, a workflow. And this workflow is for architecture. We've seen a lot of great Deforum animations, but they're not always architectural. They're more like comic strip or character type animations. So this is going to be geared toward architecture. So the first thing you're going to want to do is check your Stable Diffusion checkpoint. I'm using Architecture Real Mix, and you can search that up on Civet AI, Architecture Real Mix. I found that to be a pretty good one. All right, so the first thing we're going to do after we verify the checkpoint is we're going to load our starting image. So today we're going to be focusing on the Deforum tab. So I'm going to click on Deforum, and we're going to cover the basics of Deforum that are found under this tab. So under Deforum, we have some sub tabs. We have Run, we have Keyframes, we have Prompts, we have Init, ControlNet, Hybrid Video, and Output. We're going to start with Init. And in this case, I'm bringing in an image to start with, something to give Stable Diffusion and Deforum some inspiration. Take some inspiration from my starting image and go from there. So I'm just going to click on this, click to upload, and I'm going to upload an image. And if you want to see what that looks like, I can open that up. This is something that was created in Mid-Journey. It's a walk through a park in Chicago. So we're going to start with that image. Okay, so we're going to bring that in. Now, something that I forget to check often is I forget to check use init. Actually, use that. They should make that default once you upload the image, but it's not. So I want to check use init. And I've had good results with 0.8 as the strength. If you lower this down, it doesn't use the image so much. It uses its own generation, but I want it to use that image. So I'm putting that at 0.8. I find that to be a good setting. The next thing we're going to look at is the prompt. So I'm going to look at the prompt tab. So prompts. And you see they have a default prompt here, tiny cute bunny, and so on and so forth. It makes a really cute animation. And then you see that it has at 0 frames, do this. At 30 frames, do that. At 60 frames, do that. At 90 frames, do this. Our animation is going to be 240 frames. So I have a prompt here, and I'll get us more familiar with that I'm ready to go with. I'm going to copy that and paste that into Deforum, into the prompt for Deforum. And I'm putting it between those squiggly brackets. You see there's a top squiggly bracket or a beginning squiggly bracket and an end squiggly bracket. I'm putting it right in between there. Okay, and it's going to start out with a person walking in a park in Chicago at 0 frames. Then at 60 frames, it's going to be a person in the audience watching a rock band at a festival. And then at 120 frames, it's going to be a building in the parametric style with a geometric facade covered in graffiti. I don't think it got the graffiti, but that's another story. And then it's going to end with an eye level view showing an Apple store. So those are my key points and my prompts in my animation that it's going to hit at frame 0, frame 60, frame 120, frame 180. So I have that in there. So the next thing I need to do is go to keyframes. So you see I'm going from init to prompts to keyframes. I'm kind of working my way backwards. That's just my workflow. I haven't worked with ControlNet or hybrid video or output, so we won't cover those three. We'll just be looking at init, prompts, now keyframes, and then run. So for keyframes, my maximum frames I'm going to put is 240. And if I look at output, even though I said I wasn't going to look at output, I am going to look at output though. So if I go to output, you'll notice the default is 15 frames per second. So if I take my 240 divided by 15, that's going to give me 16 seconds of animation. So 16 seconds of animation is what I'm going to use. I'm going to set the animation mode to 3D, and we're going to dive pretty deep into that in a little bit. So we're going to do 3D movements. 2D is like no camera, just the canvas, just an image, kind of moving the image around. 3D is moving the camera around and moving the image around, so you can do both. So we're going to, in this video, focus on 3D. And then under cadence, so this is the number of in-between frames that will not be directly diffused. So I have it set to 1 by default, so every frame is going to be rendered out. But if I want to do some quick animations to see what's going to happen, I'm going to set this high. I'm going to set this for 15. So I'm going to see every 1 second of my animation. Then it's going to blend in between. It's going to make a smooth animation, but that's not what I'm going for with this deform. I'm going for an animation that morphs every frame and keeps morphing like I showed in the beginning. So I'm not looking for smooth. If you want smooth, you can keep it at 15 or even higher. You can experiment with that. I'm just setting it at 15 now to render out quickly, and then we'll come back and set that to 1. Okay, so I think this is a good time to run a test. So we haven't done any of the 3D animation. Just keep that in mind. We're just using the default. There are some default settings already set up for us, but we're going to come back and look at those 3D settings. So we'll do a quick draft. We'll just click on generate. Okay, what I'm realizing is one thing that I forgot that's really important. So I'm going to interrupt this. One thing that I forgot is under run. I didn't go back to the run settings. So under run, there are some things that I want to show. One is the resolution. So I'm going to render this out at 1/3 my final resolution. So when you're doing these tests, you don't want to render it out high resolution. You don't want to have to wait for that. You want to render it out at low resolution. So I think 1/3 your final resolution is a good starting point. So I'm going to look at 372 for the width, and for the height, I'm going to make that 485. And then my final resolution will be 3 times that. The sampler that I've been using is different than what I've been using to generate images. I've been using the Euler sampler because we're generating video, and I found that to be a pretty good one for video. Feel free to experiment with different samplers. The other thing that I found is that sampler step of 30 is really good. Anything higher than that doesn't really affect the outcome. So that's about the max number of steps to have some noticeable effect to the outcome. So we'll leave it there. So now we're ready to generate a test. So we'll go ahead and click on generate. All right, so after it generates, and that took a little bit of time. Not a lot of time, but a little bit. So after it's done, you do have to click up here on this button. Click here after the generation to show the video. So I'm going to click on that to show my video, and it pops my video up in a little window here, and I can just play that. So the default 3D movement is just kind of zooming in. That's all it does. It just zooms in the whole time. So this is just zooming in. And we're not seeing a lot of generative images, meaning not a lot of morphing from one to the other. It's just very smooth movement. And that's because our cadence was set to 15, and we'll go back and change that. So just getting a sense of what things are looking like. Now we want to focus on the 3D movement. Before we jump into that 3D movement though, I just want to look at a couple other settings. So we'll close this video. All right, so we're going to go to the Keyframes tab. That's where we're going to spend the majority of our time right now. And as we go down, we see a bunch of sub-tabs. We see strength, configuration, seed, subseed, step, sampler, and checkpoint. I just want to go through a few of these. So here is our strength schedule, and it's set to 0.65. And I found that to be pretty good. The lower the value, the more variety in every frame. And I thought I was getting a pretty good variety. So 0.65 must be a fairly low value. If you want less variety in the frames, go ahead and increase that. All right, the next thing that I want to look at is configuration, or CFG. So I'm going to look at CFG. And if you've used Stable Diffusion Automatic 1111 before, you'll know that this adjusts how closely Stable Diffusion will stay to your prompt, how true it will stay to your prompt. Oh, there's Rita. My dog Rita is joining us. She sees someone riding on a bicycle. So she's saying hello to them, and she's saying hello to you guys too, I'm sure. So the lower the CFG value is, the more free form, the more creative it's going to be, the less it's going to follow your prompt. So if you want to give Stable Diffusion artistic freedom, go ahead and lower that value. And you can set a schedule, so you can have less sticking to the prompt in the beginning and more sticking to the prompt toward the end. You can set up a schedule. And I think once we go over the 3D movements, you'll understand how to adjust all these schedules in Stable Diffusion Deforum. But what I'll say is the first number is the frame number, and then a colon, and then space, and then a value. So we're going to see that a lot. Frame, colon, space, value. We're going to see that a lot today. Okay, let's look at seed, the next tab. So seed is important. It's set to iteration first. So it starts with seed 1 and then goes to seed 2 and seed 3. So it's incrementally increasing the seed. Then we have fixed, which gives you terrible results. And it even says some of these things you can hover over and you'll get a flyout. And this says it'll deep fry the images over time, which I thought was funny. And then there's random. It's a random seed, and there's ladder, and there's alternate, and there's schedule. I found to have really good results with random. So I'm going to go ahead and set it to random. All right. Now I think we could run another test before we focus on the 3D motion. So we'll just run one more test with the settings that we changed so far. All right, so that again took some time. Let's click here to see the video. So it still has the same 3D movement, which is just slowly zooming in. And we're going to be changing that. The only thing that we changed really that would affect this video versus the last video is the random seed. All right, so let's dive into the 3D movements. All right, so where can we find those? So under keyframes, if we scroll down, we have motion. And we have some categories here. We have translation and we have rotation. And for both translation and rotation, we have X, Y, Z. So for translation, this is very similar to your 2D movements where you're moving the canvas. And it explains these really well here. It says move canvas left or right, move canvas up and down, move canvas toward or away from you. And that's the zoom. You see, that's the only one that has a setting. So translation Z is zooming in and out. In is positive values and out is negative values. So you see there's a positive value of 1.75 and we'll be changing that. And then you have your rotation, which tilts the canvas, but these are really like camera movements is the way that I think of them. So your rotation 3DX looks up and down. Your rotation 3DY looks right and left. And your rotation 3DZ rotates the canvas clockwise or counterclockwise. So we'll be setting these and we'll be adding keyframes. So we'll be setting motions that are going to happen at a specific time in the video. So we're just going to start with the translation Z. We're going to take a closer look at that. And that's the zooming in and out. So I'm going to start with increasing the zooming in and out. I'm going to change that to 2. So just a little bit more. So at frame 0, start to zoom in with a factor of 2. And then you add a comma for your next one and then the frame. So the next one's going to be, I'm going to work in increments of every 15 frames. So I typically have to put a keyframe just before the 15th frame. So in this case, that would be frame 14. So I'm going to put in 14, colon, space, and then my value. And my value in this case is going to stay at 2. So this means from frame 0 to frame 14, use a zoom factor of 2. And now I'm going to tell it to stop zooming. So I'm going to put a comma, space, and I'm going to put in 15, colon, space, and I'm going to put 0 in the parentheses there. So now it knows to stop the zoom at frame 15. So start at frame 0 to 14, stop at frame 15 with a factor of 0. And we're going to come back and we're going to add some zooming negatively. We're going to zoom out at the very end of the video, but we're going to come back to that. So that's where we're going to start first, our zoom, our translation Z. The next thing we're going to look at is translation X, which is going to pan, and we're going to pan toward the right with our positive value. So at frame 0, it is going to be 0, and then we're going to keep it at 0 all the way to frame 14. So we're going to put in a comma, space, 14, colon, space, and then in parentheses, we'll put 0. So it stays from 0 to frame 14. Do not translate, do not pan. But at frame 15, so we're going to put in 15, colon, space, we want you to pan with a factor of 3. All right, now we have to tell it how long to pan for. So we're going to do these in increments of 15. So now we're going to go all the way to frame 30, because 15 and 15 is 30. So at frame 29, one frame before the 30, we're going to tell it to stop. So 29 is going to be 29 space, got to put a comma, got to make sure we get a comma in there. So comma, 29, colon, space, 3, because we want you to still be moving right up to that frame. But then when you get to frame 30, we want you to stop. So we put a 0 in there. Okay, so that's our panning to frame 0. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to rotate the X. So we're going to go through rotation X, Y, and Z. We're going to go those 3 incrementally. And then we're going to come back up to translation Y. So we'll do translation Y at the end. So we're going to come down to rotation 3DX. And this is going to be starting at frame 30. So we have to put a keyframe at frame 29, one before the frame we start the movement. So that's going to be at frame 29. So put in a comma. And this is going to be frame 29, colon, space, and then in parentheses 0. So don't have any rotation along the x-axis yet until frame 30. We're going to put that in now. So we'll put in frame 30, colon, and then we're going to use a factor of 3. I've just been using these 3 factors. I think they're pretty good. They're not too tilt-a-whirl effect. They're not too dizzying. They won't make you so seasick, just a little bit. Okay, so that's 33. And then we have to tell it to rotate 3 degrees, or a factor of 3, until frame 45. So at frame 44, we'll stop the rotation. So let's do that. All right, I'm looking at some of my notes. In my original video, I had that rotating for a little bit longer, that rotation. I had it rotating for 30 frames. So let's go ahead and stick to the script and see how it turns out. All right, so we're going to go comma, frame 59, and we're going to put our colon, and then in a space, and then in parentheses, we're going to end our rotation there. So that's still rotating of 3, then comma, frame 60, space, I want that to be 0. So that finishes off the rotation in the 3DX. All right. So, well, actually, so what I'm missing here is this needs to go because this is it's gonna start rotating at 30 degrees. It's gonna stop rotating at 60. Okay, so that's our rotation 3DX. So we can leave that. We can come back and fine tune it if we need. Let's have this rotation go for a longer period of time so it's less dizzying. So let's make this go all the way to 75. So that's going to be 75, and this is going to be 74. 74, okay, perfect. All right, so that's our rotation in the X. Our rotation in the Y is going to start after the X, so it's got to start at frame 75. So from frame 0 to 74, we don't want any rotation. So I'm going to put in 74, colon, space, 0. So no rotation up to 74. Then I'm going to put in comma, 75, colon, space, and then we're going to use a scale, not a scale, but a rotation factor of 3. So 75 to 3. And we're going to have that rotate all the way until frame 90. So at frame 90, we'll tell it to be 0. Okay, so just to run through that again, at 0 frames to 74 frames, don't move. At frame 75, start moving and go all the way to 90, and then at 90, put a 0. And then these last ones without a comma, they go all the way to the end of the animation. So that stops the rotation. So one more, let's move on to Z, and then we'll do translation Y. So Z, we're going to have this go all the way from 0 to 89 with no rotation. So I got to put in comma, 89, colon, parentheses, 0. So that's no rotation up to frame 89, comma, at frame 90, we're going to make this rotate with this factor of 3. And we're going to have that go all the way to frame 115. So comma, 115, colon, space, 3. Or, well, that'll keep rotating 3 degrees all the way to the very end. So we want this to stop. So our stop is always a factor of 0. So we have that. And then our last thing we're going to do at the very end is we're going to pan or move the canvas up and down. And then we're going to zoom. So 2 more things. Moving in the Y direction, and then we're going to zoom out. So moving in the Y direction, this has to stay all the way up to frame 115, which was the last thing we entered into 3DZ. So we're going to put comma, 114, comma, colon, space, and we're going to put 0 in parentheses. So from 0 to 114, it does no translation in the Y. And then we got to tell it to start the translation at 115, colon, space, and that's going to be a factor of 3. And we're going to stop that translation 15 frames later. So we're going to stop it. Let's stop it at frame 145. So we'll put comma, 145, and then colon, space, and we'll put 0. So at 145, it's going to stop rotating. And then after that, we'll start zooming away. So after frame 145, we'll go to the translation Z to start zooming away. So we'll put in our comma, and this is going to be at 144, colon, and in parentheses 0, so it's not doing any movement until now at 145. We're going to put a colon, and then we're going to space, and then we're going to do our zoom out at a factor of -3 is going to be our zoom out. All right, so I think we have everything in. I hope that was helpful for you to get a grasp on the 3D. Let's see if we did it right. Now, the one thing I can do, or one thing I should do, is I should save these settings in case anything happens. So it saves it as a text file, and I'll have to show you where it's saving that. So I'm just going to give it a name instead of Deforum settings. I'm going to call this video, and I already had one, so this is going to be video_2. and then you just click Save Settings. Now there's no time bar, there's no spinning sand clock, there's nothing to let you know whether it's done saving or not. So you just have to cross your fingers and hope that that happened. So that's our save settings. And where it puts your save settings is it puts it under your Stable Diffusion Web UI folder. Let's just verify that. So under Stable Diffusion Web UI folder, if I scroll down, I'm going to see some text files for Deforum. So it's right in the root Stable Diffusion Web UI folder. Okay, and we'll come back to this to look at where it puts our actual animations at the very end. I got to make sure I remember to do that. Okay, so now let's see if it likes our code, so to speak, that we wrote for the movement. If we click generate and it doesn't give us any errors, we are in business. So let's click generate. No errors, so we're good to go. All right, so that took some time. Let's click here to see the video. And we should see all of our movements. So we're zooming in, we're panning to the right, we're tilting up, we're rotating, we're zooming back out. All right, so our movements are good. Now we want to look at how to make this look like the video that I showed at the very beginning, which you notice that this has some generation happening every image, or every frame, I should say. So every frame is a new image. So there's essentially 240 frames with 240 images. So we got to look at how to set that. We're going to look at cadence, and we're going to change cadence back to 1. So we're going to change cadence back to 1. And we're going to change our full resolution. So we're going to go to under run. We're going to see our resolution. So we're going to go to full resolution now. So our full resolution is going to be 816 by 1456. So that's our full resolution. All right. So we're going to go ahead and generate that and let that run. So that's going to take some time at full resolution. And let's take a look at where it saves these files. So it's going to save these files under your Stable Diffusion Web UI folder, under Outputs, under Image to Image, so image to image images, and you're going to see a folder for every animation that you make. Every animation that you make is going to have its own folder, and inside that folder, so we're going to see a bunch of PNG files and one for every frame. So in our final ones, there should be 240. So there's 239, and it must start at 0. So it starts at 0 to 239. Then there's a settings text, and then there is the MP4, the MPEG file. So you have all those there. And you can always load those settings in. So while this is rendering, I can scroll down here. You can also always load all settings. Click load all settings and grab your settings and bring them in. All right, so that's going to render out. That's going to take some time. That was everything that I wanted to cover. All right, Stable Diffusion with Deforum. I hope you're going to make some awesome animations. Share them with me. I would love to see them. All right, my head's going to pop up in the upper left. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and click on that to subscribe. In the upper right, I'm going to put a video. In the lower right, I'm going to put a video. Give me a like and let me know in the comments why you liked it. All right, thanks for watching. Have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll see you on the next one.